Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for rejoining us for our bi-weekly interview series, Beyond the Production. With me, as always, is our fabulous music director, Mr. Francesco Miliotto. Hi, Francesco, how are you?
I'm doing great, Lauren. I'm trying to make sure that there's no styrofoam bits in my hair or anything from my unpacking a fridge this morning.
Oh, unpacking a fridge. That's what we're
Unpacking a
doing in
new
our
fridge
music
this
world
morning.
these days.
Uh-huh.
I love it. Well, as always, I couldn't be more thrilled to be back with you here.
Mm-hmm.
And joining us today, of course, is our fabulous special guest,
Yes.
Alex Fletcher. Hi, Alex.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. I am so excited to have you here today. And for our audience who is watching with us live now, and also for those who may watch later, Alex is the founder of Fletcher Artist Management. And full disclosure, Alex, you are my manager. So thus I have lots of love for you. And we here all at OSA, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. So, Alex, I always like to start this interview talking a bit about each guest's specific path into opera and or classical music, because everybody comes from a different walk of life. So could you give us a bit of backstory on your path that gets you up to where you are now?
Sure, yeah. So the cliff notes are I always sang in choirs and in a cappella groups and different stuff. Throughout school, I did the musicals, and I would step out for little solos in choir. And then when I got to college, I took voice lessons as an elective because I just was interested in learning about it. So I started getting art song and opera and singing it. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I didn't really have much exposure to opera or classical music before that. It was always in the background, but not like something I paid attention to. So I started telling my friends about it, and my friend Carl Rosenthal was a huge opera buff, and he got super excited that I was taking lessons and interested. So he started telling me about the actual classical music business and how all the different parts worked, and kind of became my Sherpa. So then he guided me into getting an internship at Washington National Opera when I was in college. At the same time, Keith Fairs, who's a wonderful baritone, his father was one of my business professors in college. So I got to know Keith through his dad and get to know some people in the opera business that way. Actually, Weston Hurt was in one of the first operas that I saw at New York City Opera, Die Todesstadt, which Keith was also in because I went up to see them in performance. So I started to learn a little bit about the business, and I went the spring of my senior year in college up to New York and interviewed with about 9 or 10 artist managers because I didn't know anything about how that part of the business worked. And all of them were very gracious, sat down, made time for me. And one of them, Neil Funkhauser, was looking for an assistant at the time. So he and I met, and we kind of stayed in touch over that summer after I graduated. And he said, yeah, if you want to move up to New York, you can be my assistant. And so I moved up in October after I had graduated. And I worked for him for 2 years, which was an amazing experience. It was just him and me in his office in his apartment, and we had a wonderful roster at that time that included Brian Emil and Stephen Costello and Eileen Perez, all starting out at the beginnings of their career, and other really wonderful people and artists. And so I got to do a lot. I learned a lot. But it was also very intense because it was only the two of us, and things moved very quickly. And at the end of the 2 years, I got fired, which was a huge shock. And I try to be open with people about that because I was 24 years old. I was not expecting to get fired. It was a big life lesson. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? So I started casting lines and trying to figure out what my options were. And luckily, a lot of the artists I'd worked with at Funkhauser artists were like, hey, start your own thing. We'll come along. And I had a lot of industry support, financial and just moral support. And I thought, okay, I guess I'll start this. Yeah. So I started Fletcher Artists in 2009 when I was 24. And then that's been the ride since.
Wow. That is amazing at 24 years old. I mean, that is fabulous. Now, I'm glad that you made the connection from college into Neil and how you got to Fletcher Artist Management. But I think something that not everyone that might be listening to us really understands is exactly the question: what is an agent?
Yeah.
So what is it that you actually do? That is
Right.
something I think most people, a lot of people listening, probably don't have an idea of how intimate that relationship is between you and the artists. So if you could explain it a little bit, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously in Hollywood, we always hear about actors having an agent and a manager, and the manager kind of is the one who talks through projects and advises on what things should be picked and that kind of micro level stuff. And the agent goes out and negotiates and secures the projects. And
Mm-hmm.
in the classical music world, we have one person who plays both of those roles. And so, my work is a lot of different things. It does include, facilitating relationships with presenters and trying to actually help secure contracts for the artists that we represent, and advising artists on contracts that are offered to them. It also, has to do with working through the mechanics of a contract from start to end. So getting it signed, making sure everything with that is set up, and then being a support system through the actual contract, all the way to the end. And I have a great team at Fletcher Artists: Sarah Frazier, who serves as artist manager at our company, and Scott Johnson, who's assistant artist manager. We all work together to help the artists with contracts from beginning to end. But then outside of the contracts, there's all sorts of other things that we weigh in on, which can include marketing and public relations efforts that artists might make. We advise and counsel on repertoire, and what kind of roles people would like to sing, when they should sing them. I think the role that the manager plays is in that area is different depending on your background. For me, because I'm not a singer, I wasn't a professional performer, I try to stay away from too much strong advice about repertoire, but rather to be a sounding board and work with an artist, a singer's team, on what kind of stuff they should or shouldn't sing and when. But yeah, and it's basically learning from our clients what their goals are and helping to facilitate those goals. So those are like some of the macro things. Those are all the micro things, like maintaining their biographies, their measurements, helping with travel, helping with lodging, all those things. So there's a lot that goes into it.
Wow.
Alex, I want to thank you because it's not often, I think, in this industry that anyone in any position feels comfortable admitting to when a major shift or change happened in their career. And you talk quite openly about how essentially getting fired from one opportunity led to exactly where you are now. And I think that's really encouraging for a lot of people in a lot of different facets to hear. I mean, I have had my own failures. Francesco, I won't speak for you. I'm you're perfect.
Also complete failure also.
But I think that's how, no matter what job you're in within this opera industry, a learning curve and experience comes with the territory, whether that's shifting from an agency to your own agency, or developing as a director or a singer or conductor. Yeah, Francesco?
Absolutely. Everything is a learning curve. And you learn the most from failures, I think, is also something that we can do. Success is wonderful and you always learn from that, but everything is a learning opportunity. And especially, from 24 years old to go out on your own and create something that is still standing 11 years later. I mean, bravo. Really.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you guys, that I can look back on that moment and see how it really was a turning point for the good, as intense as it was at the time and disruptive. And I'm a huge proponent of, talking about these things openly and honestly, talking about challenges we face openly, because people will always identify with them and have had their own challenges.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes you, again, personally, a strong agent, because you can have those kind of open and honest conversations without it seeming like your artistry or your value is at risk. It's part of the learning curve. Rafael Porto, who I think we all know, says, love this. So many wonderful people. So thank you, Rafael, for tuning in. And we've got some other wonderful folks like Ryan McKinney, Brendan Cook, great folks tuning in and watching. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. So Alex, can you talk a little bit about when you created FAM, what your vision was for putting together a roster? Because I think that is so unique to every single agency on the planet, and obviously to the people that run the agency. So when you were birthing the vision for this, what were you hoping to create, and how has that come to life for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's been a big evolution over the time that the companies existed, because at the beginning it was such a scramble that, it was like anyone that I had been working with who wanted to come, I was so thankful. And, it all just started very quickly and organically. And that's interesting, because I had some people at the time who said, take your time, like really take your time and be selective and really slow play how you add to the roster. And I think that advice was meaningful and important. But for me, I was just like, I've got to go. I've got to create this roster. And I think I got lucky that a lot of the artists that came from Funkhauser were really wonderful people and artists, and it was a great foundation for the roster. So that was how it started. And then, at some point you have to make a decision about what kind of roster you want to be. So some people want to construct a roster where all the bases are covered. Whatever the opera is, you've got options for every role. You have a larger stable of singers, conductors, directors, and it's like an ecosystem where all the information comes in from all those people and benefits the roster in many ways. And then you have the flip side of that with a much more selective roster, where it's really more about the individual focus on the artists. And I think that we landed somewhere kind of in the middle of that. So we're not a big roster, we're not a small roster. We are a roster that tries very much to commit to the individual, and we're not so concerned with what roles do you sing, how does that factor in? Oh, we need this role, we need someone who does these things. We don't really look at things that way. It's very much about the individual, and I think that part of it has really strengthened as time's gone on and as the roster's solidified. That's really our main focus now.
So when you're looking at developing going forward, you anticipate continuing in that vein. It's about individual artists and not like, I have a Pamina, I have a Tamino, I have a Queen of the Night, heading in that direction.
Right. And we do have singers that conflict on repertoire, and our thing there is we always want to be able to say, okay, we have these options that we can offer, but they're different in these ways, and each of them has their uniqueness, where if we have three people going up for a role, it's going to be three very different and identifiable versions of that role. And the same thing for conductors and directors. If we have people, we want people that have kind of different modes they operate in, so that everyone has their space, even if they kind of overlap on things or want to do the same kinds of things.
David Portillo says, love these faces and people. Love from David and David. Virginia, who's an educator here in San Antonio, who I've now met partially because we see each other on this interview series, is saying this is great information for all of us. Thank you so much for this. And we have, Nathan DePoint from Austin is watching. Hi, Nathan. And Chan Peterson from our board is saying, really enjoying this. So Alex, I think you're giving us good info. People are eager to know. Hang on, we've got one question coming in from Virginia. She says, are there any requirements for you to add someone to your roster? Okay, Virginia, we have that question coming up later in the interview. I want to continue to talk about roster building for a minute, and then we'll get to that. But question noted, Virginia.
Thank you. So really, Alex, there's something that I also want to know, and that I think people will be very interested in. I think it's the fact that you're trying to build these relationships, and you hear about people that have had the same manager or the same agent for a really long time. So I think, and as you mentioned before, but I hope we can explain a little bit more how you build those long-term relationships and how you are a significant part of developing that career so that it's something that's not just signing a piece of paper. And then, of course, that's also, it might be a little bit different for an American agent working with singers here. I don't know if you have any international people, or, I know that you have people on your roster that have done work in Europe, that have done work in Asia and things. So there's an entire set of complications and differences in there. But I think it's about building those relationships with the opera singers that obviously want to sing all around the world. So how is it that you are part of building that relationship, keeping them engaged with you, and then expanding beyond the United States? I think it's just such an important question, because everyone wants to sort of, be a jet-setting superstar everywhere, and it's your job to make them, so I think it's important. So it's good for us to know.
Yeah, I think that I think like what you said about everybody wants to jet set. I mean, the nature of this job is so, strange in some aspects, that you're itinerant, you're traveling, you're setting down in cities, and that's your home for a little bit of time. And so what that means for me as a manager is that I have to build a very trusting relationship with our clients. I mean, frankly, there needs to be intimacy with our clients in terms of they feel like they can talk to us about things that are happening in their life, because this job is all consuming. You don't go to an office and then clock off and go home. You're on the road, you're in different places. And so your life and what's happening in your life influences. So, the basic, we always set out for it to be a long-term relationship, because there are so many phases that someone can go through in a classical music career, and it's really gratifying to be a part of the different phases. And also, it's change is sometimes necessary, but it's disruptive. If you have to change management or make those kinds of decisions, it's a disruptive period, and then there's adaptation that's needed. And so we try as much as we can, to build these long-lasting relationships. So the tenets are honesty, trust, feeling like there is a real bond here, and a real security. And what that allows too is that a client can speak to us candidly about how their definitions of success might be changing as time goes on, how their priorities might be changing as time goes on. I remember, there are certain clients I've worked with who right off the bat, they said, I don't want to go to Europe. I don't want to do a fest. I'm not interested in anything like that. Please don't send me emails about Germany. And, so understanding what people's different visions are is important. And then building that long-term relationship, we get to also experience those changes in priorities as different things happen. So one of the things that we have to think about is, if we're talking about Europe and other continents, how do we approach the artist goals for those places? So for Fletcher artists, we have enough relationships abroad that we will always try to make the first effort ourselves. And in some cases, we've had clients where we've made a round of introductions. They've started off in Europe, and it's been very successful, and they've built a lot of great appearances there, and it takes care of itself organically, and that's wonderful. Sure. And then there are other clients where either we aren't seeing the traction we want, or we just think because of specifics in that person's career that maybe having a local territorial manager join on is something that would benefit them. And so to that end, we try to maintain, relationships with artist managers in London and in Central Europe and elsewhere, that we can collaborate with to help us represent artists. And then that's reciprocal as well. We represent a few people where it's only in North America, or it started out only in North America. And it's very satisfying to have those relationships as well, because you can't be everywhere at once, and you have to decide what your priorities are. I think Fletcher artists, we're very comfortable being an America-centric agency that also has reach other places, but we would never say, oh, we're international, we're everywhere, and we're comfortable with that. And then if we're comfortable with that, we can work off of that.
That's great. And I also wanted to say, I think it's also important that not just in whatever the priorities of some singers want in their career, but I think it's also important to have a supportive manager, as we sort of briefly said, as they're going through vocal changes or aging, or they're changing repertoire, or they're getting into heavier repertoire, lighter, whatever their voice is doing. I think it's also important for the audience to know that a great manager will understand all of those things, make the correct adjustments, and be a great representation for them to the opera companies as that is happening. Because then coming out the other side of that, you know, being the conductor on other sides of that, and being the friends and coach of a lot of singers that have gone through all of those things, I know that the ones that have a great and supportive manager like you, also, it helps to come out the other side of any of those vocal troubles. So that, I think, is important to be said, and I think it's great that you do that as well.
Yeah, and messaging and communication about those things is really essential. I mean, we touched on before that managers kind of maintain these relationships with presenters and work within those relationships to try to secure contracts. But if there's a repertoire change, if there's another development that occurs, a lot of times the manager is responsible for a large part of how that messaging is facilitated and how that's communicated to other people. So you know, it's important for us to be skilled in that area, and also mindful of how we're representing someone. And the same would go for someone who may be having a life event or something else that's influencing their career. We often are, you know, speaking to presenters and other people about that. So it's important that we know how to speak and communicate on behalf of our clients in an effective way.
You know, we're dancing around something in this conversation, Alex, which I think is really good for young artists, but any artist to hear, which is that and I'll speak purely for myself. When I first got into the industry, and also with my own personal ambition, part of what I felt like was, you know, drive, get to the Met, get to La Scala. Like, the only way you have a career, the only way you're respected is if you hit this like super, super upper echelon. But what I hear you talking about, which I actually now, having come off of some of my youth, is to say that what I've discovered is that artistry at any level, what's most important is that it's fulfilling for you as an artist and achieves the kind of projects and value that you want to be able to put out in the world. And I applaud you for, like I said, we're sort of dancing around saying you're interested in building careers that are unique to the individuals that you're working with, and not just shotgunning people no matter what.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you know, I mean, part of this business is that you can see an experience from afar and think you understand it in terms of performing at a certain place or working on a certain thing. And then actually doing it is sometimes different. And some people don't have as much satisfaction from things that we would objectively say define success. So for some people, yes, they want to be at the top tier. They want to travel to all those places, and that to them is a very comfortable and enjoyable way to have this career. For other people, that's not the case. And again, getting back to that, the career is so encompassing in terms of the effect on your life and the fact that you have to travel and you have to go to these other places for weeks or months at a time. You really need to feel like you're having the right kind of success for yourself.
Perfect. I love it.
So here's another question that I think people are going to find interesting. How exactly is it that you find the people on your roster? How do you discover the people on your roster? Do they come to you? Do you go to them? What happens there? And then, you know, all of the things that you need to do that we were just discussing, getting through that. But I think the first little part of this, I think, is important, whether it's auditions or, I mean, you explain it in your own words, but I think it's important to know how that first connection is made between a singer and an agent or conductor, anybody.
Yeah, so I would say the most common way is a mutual third party who, you know, who says, I know both of you and I think you would work really well together. And, you know, I think that if it's somebody that I know and I know their taste is great and I know they like great people, that I'm always keen to kind of explore any recommendations. So I think a lot of it happens that way. And then also, you know, in non-COVID times when live performances are happening, we're traveling to see our clients in those performances. So we're always seeing people in performance, meeting them before and after shows, engaging that way. And sometimes organic discussions can come about. You know, I think it's important to say that we would never solicit someone for representation who already has representation. So
Nice.
even if somebody else tells us, oh no, they really don't like their manager, you just have to ask them, and then once you ask, you can have the conversation. We don't do that. So we feel like if an artist is represented, then it's important that they begin that conversation with us. Otherwise, I would say when I was younger, we did hold kind of more formal auditions for the roster. I think in more recent years, we've kind of moved away from that just because the amount that we have added to the client list has really decreased. We've just reached a point of stability. And so we mostly meet people through those other ways that I mentioned, either seeing them, encountering them on the road, or a third party that knows both of us making a recommendation.
I want to jump in a little bit, Alex. Do you mind talking a bit? Because I know there are several organizations, like I'm thinking specifically in the summer with the Wolf Trap auditions or Glimmerglass auditions or Santa Fe auditions.
Santa Fe. Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's part of the Young Artist Program. And I want to be careful to say that is not the only way that agents discover talent. But can you talk a little bit about that part of the process for those of us that might be interested in what Young Artist training programs have to offer to agency connection?
Sure. So, I mean, just, speaking for myself, if I go to a city to see an opera and the company has a young artist program, I always ask to hear the young artist, because I think that that kind of professional interaction is important, just as part of the development of being a young artist. You have to have those opportunities to step in front of people and sing for them and speak with them. I normally try to also speak with the group afterwards so we can talk about some of the topics that we're talking about today. And it's not just me hearing you, evaluating you, and then going and eating my dinner. I like to actually have a conversation with the artists if if I'm in their city and can interact with them that way. But yes, there is a circuit, especially in the summer. Glimmerglass, Santa Fe, Central City, Wolf Trap, and some others have these large young artist programs that exist as part of their season. And most summers we do travel to most of those places and hear those artists. Sometimes we already know the artists from somewhere else, and this is another experience with that person's artistry. And sometimes we're hearing people for the first time. And I always try to do as much of that as I can. There's also a program in Neumarkt that's called the International Meistersinger Academy that I've gone to for several summers, which is another really wonderful place to encounter talent. And it's really even though sometimes those auditions are happening, the singers, it's a very full load in the summer. They're fatigued, they're working hard, there's a lot going on. It's still wonderful to be able to hear those groups of singers and to maintain contact that way.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. So Tim Botswick is saying great info. So yay for young artist info. I also want to pick up on Alex, once you've heard someone or you've got a spark of interest, and yes, you're talking about relationships around them and learning more about an artist in order to determine if they're right for your roster. But it's more than just the awesome sound that comes out of the two little flaps in your throat. I'll bet you're looking at other factors too, like rehearsal room etiquette or how they're viewed professionally. Because it's really, it's a much bigger package, I think, to find really well-rounded artists. And I'd love it if you could speak a little bit to what some of those other outside of the voice factors are that maybe you take into consideration.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, I've always remembered that my wonderful colleague, Ana de Archuleta, said on a panel we did a number of years ago, as managers, we can often get you in one place. We can get you one contract, but then whether those other contracts come really depends on how you vibed with that company during the time that you were there, because often you're there for 3 to 6 to whatever weeks. And so, so all of that is very important in terms of working with people that are professional and that companies want to rehire. But I think it's also important to note that wanting to be rehirable doesn't mean that you have to acquiesce all the time. It doesn't mean that you can't have opinions. You absolutely can and should. share your opinions and follow through on your beliefs as an artist, but you should do that within the ecosystem of the rehearsal room. So, navigating that is always a tricky process, but I think that I always have a lot of respect for artists who don't abandon their sense of self when they're involved in an artistic process and earn the respect of their colleagues and of a company. And then the company wants to rehire them because they felt their artistry was so dynamic that way, and not just because they were agreeable. Being agreeable is wonderful, but I don't think you should sacrifice your sense of self as an artist. And that's a balance beam to walk. You don't want to be off-putting to your colleagues, but you also want to maintain an artistic sense of self, because that's the beautiful thing about this business, is that everyone has their own individual artistry, and that's what they're bringing. So that's a little tangent, but
no, it's good.
But I do think that there is a lot that goes into it, and certainly even understanding how an artist might interact with us professionally is important, because there are a lot of emails, there are a lot of phone calls, there's a lot of conversation, and we need to make sure that we can communicate effectively with artists and that we are kind of speaking the same language. And we've had collaborations before that have not panned out in the long term, simply because we really spoke two different languages, in terms of like business speak and professional aspects. And again, that's a strange thing because we're in an art form, but we do also have to manage the business side of this. So there are definitely important factors, and we will always do our homework. If we're looking seriously at an artist, we will always call artists on the roster who know that person, or companies that we have relationships with who have worked with that person, to say, just tell us about them, and to get a sense of what it's like collaborating with that person.
So it's important that the both of you, that the manager and the singer, build a relationship together with the different companies.
Yes.
I think that's an important thing to say, and the involvement of that is something that you both work on together.
Yes. And sometimes when I talk to young artist programs, they'll ask questions about, what happens if you got a contract for yourself that a manager wasn't really involved in, or a question of that nature. And my response to that is always that the relationships that are the best, is simultaneously effort from both sides that is resulting in generated opportunities. And if we really think that we're both doing our part, we start to get away from conversations about, well, who influenced that thing into being and whose connection created that. It becomes about the team nature of it, that we kind of, and in some cases we've both finessed different parts of something to bring it to fruition. But it's really about being a team, and that it's, we are working together to generate things, because managers, we only get paid, and maybe you guys were going to get into this, we're paid commission on contracts. So for all the other work we do that doesn't result in a contract, there is no compensation for that. And so it becomes very important that the team of the artists and the manager feel like everyone's putting in an honest effort and everyone's bringing something to the table, and then we're enjoying the results together. And it's not so much of a, well, I did this, you didn't really do it. I don't like to have that kind of feeling with my clients, and we rarely do.
Great. Hopping in, Brendan Cook is saying there's so much more than the voice, and Alex is great at identifying quality humans to work with. And I think, yes, hats off to you, Alex, but I also think that's so important within the industry, because it really is quite small. And what I see happening within the industry is people want to work with good people. And it's a tough industry, and it's changing right now. So when you've got folks that, whether it's the agent or the administrators or the singers themselves, are invested in creating really wonderful art with really wonderful relationships, that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
So Alex, what if you don't have a manager? And that can be a huge question, at any age. That can be a young artist question. How do I get one for the first time? And that can also be a yikes, I'm in between. What do I do now? Do you have any thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, an interesting thing about the industry is that we have this understanding that the dynamic is that the agent or the manager has the power and the client doesn't, because the manager often is the one who has information about different things, and then they have to give that to the artist. So there's like a dynamic there. But the artist is the one who employs the manager, so again, we shouldn't have that understanding. And I think the point I try to make with that is that artists who are unrepresented can do a lot of stuff on their own. And actually artists who cultivate their own activities can really hold a lot of power if there are managers that are interested, and an artist is really savvy and really evaluative about a manager and thinking, do I actually want to bring this person into what I'm already doing? How would this person benefit me? How would we benefit each other, rather than just this idea that, oh, you have to have a manager. Right. So the first person that approaches you, you have to agree to it. I've seen artists who have built really wonderful profiles on their own. And I think that, a key to that is having a great web presence. These days, someone mentions an artist to me, I immediately go Google them. And then it becomes a question of, what can I find out about them? If they have a beautifully put together website that has everything at a touch, their bio, their media, all nicely laid out, then I'm already on my way to learning about that person. If I have to go find bits and pieces of it different places and read their bio from a young artist program they were in a few years ago, not as effective in terms of how I'm learning about that person. So that's a key to it. And then networking is a huge key. And what I always tell young artists is, don't be afraid to write networking emails and to say to someone, I sang for you, I really enjoyed it. Would you mind if I keep you updated on my activities every 6 months, every 3 months, whatever seems appropriate for what you're doing? And then building a network that way. So there are lots of things that you can do on your own. And then when it comes time to selecting a manager, again, it shouldn't just be any manager. How you get along with a manager is very important because of the things we talked about earlier. And so selecting a manager, you need to think about, what are my priorities? Is this someone who just handles the business end for me, and I'm really not going to clue them in on things that are happening in my life, and I don't want them to be a part of that? Because then that's a different process than if you're looking for someone who you feel on the same plane as a human or something like that. And then you need to be looking at things with a different lens. Right. So never sign up with just the first person because you think you have to have someone, and get to know the actual person, not just the title, not just the company, not just the name, but that person, because you're going to be doing a lot of working and a lot of interacting, and you're going to be handing over to that person the authority to speak on your behalf, the authority to gather information that might not always come to you on the timeline that you want it to. You're empowering that person with a lot.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to note and at least this is my own personal experience, what the self-evaluation factor for the artist is in terms of what their comfort level is with their own networking and negotiation. So I'm going to go out on a limb, Alex, and you can tell me I'm totally wrong, but I consider myself like super aggressive. I'm in it all the time. I'm networking. I'm making contacts. And I feel very comfortable doing a lot of that communication and even sometimes negotiations, like before I was with you, on my own. But and I think like you have been saying, you need to be with an agent who understands what your personality type is and what your comfort level is. But you could also be the exact opposite of me. You could feel really naked and exposed in that territory and not like it. And being with someone who recognizes who you are as an artist and can help guide you on that path seems like something that you're saying is very important.
Yeah. And I think it's always interesting, you'll see singers who will come on to the competition audition circuit and gather a lot of interest right off the bat. And you'll see them from afar, you'll see them perform, and you'll start to make certain assumptions about them. Then when you actually talk to that person for the first time, sometimes they're a completely different kind of person from what you were anticipating. They might be unconfident, shy, soft-spoken, even if they perform in a totally different way. And sometimes you see those people getting pushed along in the career, perhaps faster than they would like to, or in directions they wouldn't necessarily like to go because the talent is in a certain place, but then they are not really the type of person who speaks up and who speaks out. And so that's something that can be difficult to manage because you know, someone who is not naturally aggressive and outspoken still needs the same level of you know, kind of having, I don't know what we want to call it, protection or just an intermediary. They still need somebody really quality speaking on their behalf. So that's always been an intriguing part of the career to me, is to see those different personality types and you know, to kind of see how the career unfolds for them.
Speaking of parts of the career that you love, what is it? I mean, we are all trying to do something that we love, and we assume everyone in the arts is privileged to do that and is excited to do that. But what is it about being a manager? Because you've been doing it for just so long, and straight out of school, and on your own with your own company for so long. What is it about being a manager that keeps you doing it for over a decade now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that inherently I'm a people person, and this is all about people, and so I get a lot of satisfaction out of investing in people and being a part of people's journeys. The difficult part about being an artist manager is you're along for the ride. So just as an artist is. So
you never know where they're going to pull you. I know.
Yeah,
you never know where you're going to get pulled.
Yeah, when things are high, they're high, but they can be low, and then you also feel low because you're invested. So, you know, that's a part that's double-edged in terms of this work. But I mean, I think the thing that has always motivated me is just because I'm a people person, I'm invested in these people, and traveling to a city and seeing someone's work come up on stage, seeing someone in the pit guiding a performance, seeing someone on the stage, you know, vocally performing, and seeing how audiences react, and being a part of this living, breathing thing. But, you know, kind of on the support side, I just find a lot of satisfaction in that.
Great. So Chan Peterson is chiming in with a question, which is where I was going to head next. I'm going to sort of two-part it for you, Alex. Part of it's about talking big picture about COVID and what's going on in the roster and where we think we're headed. But Chan's question specifically is thoughts on the industry post-COVID. How rapidly does it emerge/open up? Key changes that will be facilitated by the pause for artists, companies, agencies, challenges in reconnecting with audiences. Yes, Chan, it's very difficult. That's what I feel like. It's like that's a magic question right now. But specifically, Alex, I'd love for you to start that conversation by talking about how artists on your roster are feeling right now, because it runs the gamut a little bit. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of, you know, I think a lot of, we've kind of stabilized from the very intense period of March and April, where we were all just kind of rocked and totally caught by surprise. And that was a very difficult thing to process. Some people may still be processing that. I think that the immediate launch into the digital platform and the digital sphere, which of course makes sense because it's the closest thing we can reach out and grab when we can't be live in a theater. Artists have had totally varying reactions to that. Some people, I'm amazed at the level of comfort they have in their living room recording on a cell phone, how much they are able to communicate through that. And then by the same token, we have artists who just say, it's not my medium. I've recorded a bunch of things. I don't like any of them. I don't like doing it this way. And I don't think that one is at all better than the other. You know, it's totally understandable. Right. These people have prepared to do this art form a certain way, and what we have available to us right now is a totally different version of that. I mean, having said that, I think there are some really cool and exciting things that have unexpectedly emerged, and just getting to see. I'm particularly interested when we get away from artists just doing like a very traditional version of what they would normally do in an opera house, and we see their other skills. We see the other areas of interest that they're able to show through the digital platform. And I think for me, that's been like kind of a silver lining, is just getting to experience artists in different ways. Seeing, you know, some of these wonderful, you know, who knew Karen Slack and Laquita Mitchell are ready to host day talk shows.
Daytime
I'll
TV,
come
I
on,
know.
you know, like it's just wonderful seeing some of that. So, but no, it's completely run the gamut. And I don't know how much of the bigger part of the question you want me to opine on, but I mean, I'm happy to kind of share from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just kick that off, Alex, by saying, Chan, it's a great question, and I wish we had, you know, specific answers. Like, we will be able to open up on November 23rd at 7 p.m. But part of what's so tricky, I think, is that even now, what are we, 4 or 5 months into this? The information still seems to be changing daily, and it's city to city and state to state and country to country. So I'd love to hear a little bit just from your perspective on how to buoy spirits and what you see coming, knowing that we're living in uncertain times.
Yeah, I think one of the great challenges of this is that we already knew that most presenting companies are in their own community and have their own specific circumstances that they operate within. And I think we also knew that each company kind of operated its own way and did things slightly differently, and would, you know, take different risks, or have different options available to them in terms of funding and things like that. And unfortunately, what this pandemic has exposed is all of that there is no uniform answer. There is no uniform approach that can be taken, because every one of these companies is its own organism in its own community. So it's, you know, I think it's going to be a different thing for every place, and a different timeline, and how much it looks like what it was before will be different. You know, but I also think that opera is a very resilient art form, and has faced so many challenges. And you know, I think I was watching an interview with Michael Kaiser, the former Kennedy Center president, who said, you know, that opera always comes back. People don't forget the things that are important to them, and classical music is something that's really important to people and speaks to people, and it always comes back. And I think that it will again. It's just a question of, like you said, when will we know more? When will we have concrete information we feel we can really soundly act upon?
That's great. I mean, so there are, I mean, I think that, you know, taking the step back and being able to sort of relook at everything that we're looking at right now, and re-examining the thing. I mean, are there any sort of silver linings as to how we're going to come back that you can think of, or benefits to having done this and expanded how we see opera, how we present opera, what we do, all the other talents that we can do? I mean, you could start another agency with a bunch of other people, you know, like, I mean, there's got to be a silver lining in everything that we do, and taking a pause, you know, however it needs to be done, or however it's forced on us to do. Anytime looking back and reflecting is a way to grow. So is there anything that you think we can benefit from, or any silver linings you can see from this terrible time?
Well, I think that opera as an art form and classical music as an art form has known that we have to continue to engage younger generations. We need to replenish our younger stakeholders and audience members. And I think we've seen some people do that very effectively, and some people have felt uncertain about how exactly you go about that. And I think, you know, one of the advantages of right now is we're being forced to explore the digital platform much more thoroughly than we might have if we were really still in the midst of a normal, robust performance schedule. And so I'm sure that there are going to be organic ideas that come out of that companies then will integrate when they come back and can have live theater. They'll also have a suite of things that we have so far only seen certain companies providing or envisioning. I think we'll see more of that in more places, and that's certainly a positive thing for the art form.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things that I've been surprised about in a good way, and have learned more about, speaking of silver linings, as a result of COVID is the opportunity to gain so much insight through interviews like this one. Now, obviously, OSA is not the only organization that's doing insight, but I think what that's exposed through these kind of interviews is how siloed the communication maybe was pre-COVID. Are you finding that's changing now in an era where most of us, regardless of what our position is in opera, agent, singer, conductor, general director, we're in uncharted territory? And so has the communication changed at all for you, and for the better or for the worse?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that previous to the pandemic, we all sort of had our ways that we went about things, and we, there were certain groups that just didn't really interact that much, and now needing to be so solution based, needing to brainstorm, needing to work with each other. I'm seeing a lot of conversations happening in different ways than they previously did. I mean, first of all, managers and agents are networking and discussing on a much greater scale than they previously did. We're all competitors, and so previously we may work with certain agencies or collaborate or share information, but that wasn't a broad thing. And I think that that group of people has gotten more comfortable getting together, talking, understanding where we see things the same and where we see things differently. And I think just the same way, for example, the union, American Guild of Musical Artists, AGMA, that a number of opera companies and other organizations are signatories to. Previously, there was a very adversarial relationship between the union and managers that was based on things that happened decades ago. And the younger people in the business have no concept of that, and we don't understand why we don't communicate. And I think it's been wonderful to see that now, yes, we are all talking and we are in touch. And it's also just created a lot of opportunities for managers and general directors and other groups of people to sit down and connect in different ways, because more now than ever, we've needed to understand the other person's side in much more detail. Previously, I only needed to understand a company's side as much as it involved the negotiation of the contract and the show and the way that everything went during the production period. Now, with a lot of the changes that have had to happen in programming and everything that comes out of that, there's really more that I need to understand about a company in order to have a complete discussion with them about everything. And so we're connecting a lot more that way. And I think that's really important because, like I said before, every organization, different community, different organism. And before, we didn't really know much about how any of them operated because we didn't really need to. And we may get back to that place where we don't really need to know that much. But having that opportunity right now where we are looking more closely at each other's sides helps us to understand each other better. And that's an important thing.
Yeah. Fantastic. Alex, I find you amazingly insightful, and it sounds like folks who have joined us this afternoon do as well. Are there any parting pearls of wisdom that you have as agent to artists out there as we look towards the future?
I really think that having kind of an ongoing conversation with yourself as an artist is a really important thing, and it's not something that should ever really stop. So a lot of the things we talked about today in terms of how do you define success and why do you define it that way? What kind of lifestyle do you want to have? What kind of career do you want to have? Constantly checking in with yourself about that, because I can think of some really beautiful examples where people started as a performing artist and thought, this lifestyle is not working for me. And rather than forcing themselves into it, they pivoted into another part of the business and are really wonderful in that part. And then there are people who have redefined what they feel comfortable with. Some people are comfortable being raised in America, growing up, hey, Nick Brownlee, growing up in Alabama and then moving to Germany and setting up your whole life there. Hey, Ryan Speedo Green, moving to Vienna and setting up your whole life there,
Right.
And so I think having that conversation with yourself about what do you want this to look like and what's happening right now and how is that feeling, and never really getting away from that is important, because otherwise other people will make decisions for you, and this career is too involved to let other people make the decisions on your behalf.
Fabulous.
Fabulous.
Well said, Alex. Weston Hurt says, absolutely brilliant. And Sammy Serrano says, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for this interview. This is all great information. And Virginia is saying, love this. Thanks again. So it sounds like for many people who are joining us live now, and I'm sure for others who watch this after, that you're blowing open insight on agents and how to be a healthy, phenomenal artist. And for that, I can't thank you enough, Alex.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. So I want to say thank you. David Portillo says thank you all. I want to say thank you to David Portillo and everybody else who's watching live. And also, of course, thank you to our future viewers. This video will remain up on the Opera San Antonio website, on our Facebook page, and on our YouTube page. So there's plenty of ways to help your friends and family and loved ones catch this later if you know of anybody who might be interested. Also, if you're interested, I would suggest Google stalking Alex Fletcher. You can look up Fletcher Artist Management and find out more about Alex and his particular roster. And that's a great place to start. Brendan Cook is also saying, I want to say thank you to David Portillo too. So we're having an industry thank you moment. And Brian Wallen is saying thank you. Hi, Brian Wallen. Good to know you're with us. Then looking ahead really quickly for everybody who is watching, Opera San Antonio does have another event today. We're doing the 4th in our educational video series called Explore Opera for Kids. Today is Timeless Tales. It's about a 20-minute video that gives you some fun insight on how stories are brought to life. And in particular, we focus on Gounod's interpretation of Romeo and Juliet. And that's going to be at 2 o'clock today on the OSA Facebook and YouTube channels. And then next time, we will all be back for Beyond the Production. Will be on August 14th. And as always, that's at noon over the lunch hour. So I hope to see some people joining us later on this afternoon and some people in a couple weeks. And thank you again, Alex. It's been a true pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Have a lovely afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye. We'll see you in a couple weeks for the next Beyond.
Bye. Thank you.